and victims lured to mysterious meetings. These days, you often hear cautionary horror stories about Craigslist, where innocent victims will either post or answer an advertisement on the website, and end up crossing paths with a psychopath, who used the ad to lure them to a meeting and do them harm. However, this type of thing occurred long before Craigslist even existed. There have been numerous frightening tales of unsuspecting victims, who were lured to a meeting with an unknown individual, and wound up being murdered or vanishing without a trace. In many of these unsolved cases, the identity and motive of the person who arranged the ill-fated meeting is unknown, and it's possible that the victim was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. 1. The disappearance of Leonard Derrickson. Derrickson was last seen at his farmhouse in Strong City, Oklahoma on March 14, 1998. His son told authorities that an unidentified Caucasian male arrived at Derrickson's home during the day. The individual drove a white 1994 Ford F-150 extended cab pickup truck with a yellow tag on the vehicle's front end. The vehicle may have had New Mexico license plates. A sketch of the man is posted below this case summary. Derrickson's son said that his father told him the man wanted to view a horse he had for sale. He claimed they planned to travel to Elk City, Oklahoma and Mobeetie, Texas during the day. Derrickson said that they would return to the farm later in the evening. Neither Derrickson nor the man have been heard from again. Derrickson never advertised that he had a horse for sale. Investigators believe that the presumed buyer knew him beforehand. Authorities do not know if the unidentified man was involved in his disappearance. Derrickson's son said the possible suspect had a full reddish-brown beard and wore a cap when he drove to the farm. He was approximately 41 years old in 1998. The man was 6'2" tall and about 210 pounds. He was apparently right-handed and smoked Marlboro Light cigarettes. There have been 2 reported sightings of Derrickson since his 1998 disappearance. A server at the Kettle restaurant in Elk City told authorities that a man resembling Derrickson stopped at the eatery at approximately 11 a.m. on March 14. Investigators believe that the employee may have confused Derrickson with another individual. He had breakfast at home prior to his disappearance, and Derrickson's family members said it was uncharacteristic of him to eat again shortly afterwards. Authorities also received a phone call from an unidentified man in Amarillo, Texas 6 months after Derrickson vanished. The caller claimed that he was seated next to Derrickson in the establishment. Both the caller and the man thought to be Derrickson had disappeared by the time investigators arrived on the scene. Neither of these sightings has been confirmed. Derrickson was left in debt after his 1996 divorce. His family members said that Derrickson was very close to his son, and would never voluntarily leave on his own. Authorities believe that foul play may have been involved in Derrickson's disappearance, but there is little evidence to support any theory. Before his disappearance, Leonard was experiencing serious financial difficulties because of his divorce and the recent folding of his dairy business, so there was speculation that he might have disappeared voluntarily. However, those close to Leonard don't believe he ever would have abandoned his son. Leonard Derrickson has not been seen since his disappearance, and no one knows the identity of the man who visited him that morning. 2. The murder of Dorothy Miller. Dorothy H. Miller, a 48-year-old Balmain realty saleswoman and grandmother of 2, was killed on Monday evening, August 18, 1969, in an unoccupied, 2-story frame house at 118 Grand Street in Burlington, Iowa. Dorothy reportedly had an appointment to show a house in Burlington that day to a man who identified himself as Robert Clark. When she didn't return home that evening, her husband reported her missing the following morning. Dorothy's body was found that same day, Tuesday, August 19, 1969, at the Grand Street Burlington home, lying face down in an upstairs bedroom closet, partly disrobed and with her hands tied in front of her. She'd been raped and stabbed 22 times. In a Des Moines Register article dated August 21, 1969, Burlington Police Inspector Jim Ewing said the man suspected of killing Miller was seen in a local tavern about 4 p.m. the afternoon the murder occurred. Police said the murder took place sometime between 7:45 and 8:45 p.m. Ewing said the man told Miller he was from the Des Moines area when he telephoned her for an appointment, and she'd gone to show him the house a second time the night she disappeared. Miller first showed the house to Clark the previous Friday evening, But Miller's husband of 29 years, Fred Miller, had accompanied his wife that night. They'd picked up Clark near the Maple Leaf Tavern on Maple Street that night, and after Clark saw the home he decided he wanted to show pictures of the house to his wife. He requested another showing for the following night, but Miller had to decline due to a scheduling conflict. She did, however, agree to show the property to him again, and they scheduled the appointment for Monday evening at 7:30 p.m. Miller phoned him at the tavern the night as he'd requested, and bar patrons confirmed a man fitting Clark's description had taken a phone call there sometime between 7 and 7:30 p.m. A brutal slaying. Fred Miller drove a truck for a living, and didn't accompany his wife to the Grand Street home's second showing. He was in bed by 8:30 p.m. and didn't wake up until 5 a.m. the next morning when the alarm clock went off. Realizing his wife wasn't home, he phoned the couple's only daughter, then 27, and they drove to the last site, the Grand Street home Dorothy had scheduled to show the night before. During the search around the home, they found Miller's car, unlocked and with the keys still in the ignition, parked in the 900 block of Elm Street. Mr. Miller immediately drove to the police department to report his wife as missing. Police inspectors Wendell Patton and Jean Luce first searched Miller's vehicle for clues, finding only an unused camera flash cube on the front seat. From there they headed for the Grand Street home and found its back door unlocked. They found Miller in a second-floor bedroom closet of an otherwise clean room. Patton and Luce said they believed the killer likely struck Miller in the head shortly after the two entered the home. The killer had then tied her hands, pulled off her undergarments and raped her. After the assault, she'd been moved into the closet, where the killer then stabbed her 22 times in the face, neck and back. Psychiatric social worker and sketch artist Harold B. Lee, who worked for the Southeast Iowa Mental Health Center, met with Fred Miller and bar patrons to develop a composite of the man based on eyewitness descriptions. They described Clark as a 5'9" to 5'11" good-looking, dark-haired clean-cut man between 20 and 30 years old, having a medium complexion and weighing around 175 pounds. He'd been driving a dull black cab-over-engine pickup truck, they said. While Lee worked on the suspect's sketch, police conducted a house-to-house canvass in the Grand and Maple Street area, interviewing more than 200 individuals. Burlington police requested assistance from the Iowa State Patrol and Iowa Bureau of Criminal Investigation, now the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, and collected evidence from the crime scene for submission to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C., for testing. Burlington police also searched for the black pickup truck the killer allegedly used. Reward offered for well-known, well-liked woman. Many area residents knew the young Burlington grandmother. Prior to getting her real estate license, Miller had worked at the Iowa Army ammunition plant and also been employed as a proofreader for the Burlington Hawkeye Gazette newspaper. The newspaper and the Burlington Board of Realtors each offered $500 toward a $1,000 reward for information leading to the killer's conviction. The problem, police discovered, was that the man who called himself Robert Clark had made up everything he'd shared with bar patrons and Miller. Lee told investigators the man appeared to be a psychopath who'd not only killed before but wouldn't stop after Miller's slaying. Patton and Luce worked the homicide for weeks during an intense investigation, typing up every report on thin onion skin paper, but the case eventually went cold. On Sunday, July 25, 2004, Burlington Hawkeye reporter Dorothy D'Souza compiled an extensive, 3-page story on Iowa's unsolved cases, focusing specifically on the Dorothy Miller and Mary Lang unsolved murders. Mary Bernice Lang, 37, had been missing for 2 days when her fully clothed body was found shortly before 10 a.m. Saturday, December 19, 1970, floating in Long Creek's shallow waters, below a bridge on the seldom used Agency Road 9 miles west of Burlington. An autopsy concluded Lang suffered 3 blows to the head from a blunt object, and then, while unconscious, was dragged into the water to drown. Her case remains open as well. Patton, who'd gone on to serve as Burlington's chief of police before retiring in 1994, told D'Souza time isn't always on a homicide investigator's side. In a homicide case you make every effort possible, he said. That's all we lived and worked. Jim Schreiner, who'd retired 3 years earlier, told D'Souza he believes the man drifted into town during the week of the Hawkeye Fair and left town after the killing. D'Souza gets cited facts about homicides that remain as true today as the day she wrote the story. In every homicide, family members, particularly spouses and lovers, are looked at first as suspects. 80% of the time, the killer is well known to the victim. Dorothy D'Souza gets, the Burlington Hawkeye, July 25, 2004. The remaining 20% present their own residual challenges. It's cases like Miller, those 20%, that you really hate to let get away from you and go unsolved, Schreiner said. Away from 3. The murder of Penny Bell. In 1991, 43-year-old Penny Bell lived in Denham, England with her husband, Alistair, and their 2 children and ran a successful catering employment agency. At 9:40 a.m. on June 6, Penny told some builders working on her home that she was running late for a 9:50 appointment before she left. At around noon, Penny's Jaguar was discovered in the car park of the Gurnall Leisure Centre in the Greenford suburb of London. She had been stabbed 50 times in the front seat. Some design samples for Penny's bedroom were laid out on display between the driver's and passenger's seats. The witnesses who found Penny claimed they had seen the Jaguar parked there since 11 a.m. with its hazard lights flashing and windscreen wipers running, but did not check the vehicle until 1 hour later. Other witnesses would report seeing Penny's Jaguar driving very slowly along Greenford Road sometime after 10 a.m. with the hazard lights flashing and windscreen wipers running. She appeared to be struggling with an unidentified male passenger in the front seat. One witness would even recall seeing Penny drive into the leisure center car park while silently mouthing the words "help me out" the window. The male passenger was described as being around 40 years old with dark hair, but no one got a very good look at him, since Penny was not sexually assaulted and her handbag was left behind. No apparent motive could be found. No one knew anything about the alleged 9:50 appointment she mentioned to the builders. Penny's diary showed no record of this appointment even though she was usually very meticulous about keeping records. It also turned out that 3 days before the murder, Penny had withdrawn £8,500 from the joint bank account she shared with her husband. She never told Alistair about this or kept any record of the transaction, and the money was never found. Alistair was ruled out as a suspect, but since he was bisexual and had been involved in a serious relationship with a man before his marriage to Penny, there was speculation that the missing £8,500 might have been blackmail money. However, no evidence has ever been found to suggest that Alistair or Penny were involved in an extramarital affair, or that they had any dark secrets. In 1992, a family friend named John Richmond contacted a tabloid and claimed he was with Penny at the time of her murder and would reveal the full story if they paid him £80,000. Richmond said that Penny was murdered by a contract killer because she was having a secret relationship with him. Though the wording in the source link is murky about whether Penny was having this affair with Richmond or the contract killer. Richmond was arrested after his fingerprints were found in Penny's Jaguar, but since there was no other evidence against him, Richmond was released and police are not sure if they lend much credence to his story. Before she was found, 2 witnesses reported seeing Penny drive her car through Greenford with an unidentified male passenger. They appeared to be struggling, and Penny could be seen staring out the window and mouthing the words "help me." It's theorized that Penny met her killer at another location, and he then forced her to drive to the leisure center, where she was subsequently murdered. However, to this day, no one knows the identity of Penny Bell's killer or his motive. 4. The disappearance of Carmen Halleck. Halleck, a cocktail waitress, was last heard from by her sister-in-law on December 18, 1969, in their hometown of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Halleck called her sister-in-law and told her that she had an appointment with a male teacher from the local junior college that evening. Halleck said that the unidentified teacher also did undercover work for the government and that the meeting revolved around a possible employment opportunity for her, which would include international travel and a high salary. She purchased a pair of black patent leather pumps and told her sister-in-law she planned to wear the shoes that evening, along with a black cocktail dress. Halleck was never seen again. Halleck's sister-in-law became concerned when she was unable to contact Halleck by Christmas Day, 1969. She checked Halleck's apartment shortly thereafter and discovered that Halleck's car keys, driver's license and vehicle registration were missing. Her bathtub was full and her dog had not been fed. Her sister-in-law could not locate the high heels or the black dress Halleck intended to wear to her meeting with the unidentified teacher in the apartment. Halleck's car was found abandoned in a nearby parking lot a few days later. There was no sign of her at the scene. A missing persons report was filed for Halleck, but there was no trace of her until April 1973. Over 4 years after her disappearance. 2 gold-filled teeth and a shamrock pin discovered in the possession of Gerard John Schaefer Jr., a former Florida law enforcement officer, were identified as belonging to Halleck at that time. Schaefer was eventually convicted of the murders of 2 young women in the Florida area in the 1970s, and sentenced to 2 life prison sentences. A photo of Schaefer is posted below this case summary. Neither of the victims was Halleck. The rest of her remains have yet to be discovered, and as such she is still listed as a missing person. Schaefer is believed to be responsible for attacks, murders and disappearances of many other young women in the 1960s and 1970s. It has been established that Schaefer was employed as an intern teacher in 1969, in Fort Lauderdale, which made him a viable candidate for suspicion in Halleck's disappearance. He also wrote a fantasy story about a woman who wore black high heels and a black dress. Schaefer claimed he penned the fantasy in 1967, 2 years before Halleck vanished, but authorities believe he authored the story as a reminder of his crime in 1969. Schaefer was never charged in connection with Halleck's case, although her teeth were discovered among his belongings. Possessions of other probable victims of Schaefer's, including Lee Heinlein Benetti's, were also located in his belongings at the time of his 1970s arrest. Benetti's disappeared in 1969, and her body was found in 1978, but not identified until 2004. He is also considered a suspect in the disappearances of Peggy Rand, Wendy Stevenson, Nancy Leichner and Pamela Nader. The family of Deborah Lowe, who disappeared in 1972, believes he was involved in her case as well. All of the women are still missing. Schaefer wrote a book with the assistance of his former girlfriend, Sandra London, entitled Killer Fiction. He was killed in prison in 1995, by another inmate, Vincent Faustino Rivera, who has since been convicted of Schaefer's murder. Florida authorities had reopened the investigations into Halleck and Benetti's disappearances and presumed deaths in 1995. Hoping to connect Schaefer to the crimes and close the cases. His murder halted any further investigation into the disappearances. Halleck has never been located and her case remains unsolved but inactive. 5. The murder of Lindsay Buzick. On February 2, 2008, 24-year-old real estate agent Lindsay Buzick received a phone call from a woman who asked if she could show her an expensive home in the Sannock district of Vancouver. Lindsay agreed to meet the woman at 5:30 p.m., but she soon received another call from a man who said he would be meeting her instead. This made Lindsay uneasy, so she asked her boyfriend, Jason Zailo, to check in on her while she showed the house. Jason and one of his friends arrived at 5:45 p.m. and claimed that they saw 2 figures moving around inside. When Lindsay didn't respond to a text message, Jason and his friend decided to enter the house. They would discover Lindsay's body in the upstairs bedroom. She had been stabbed over 40 times. At 5:41 p.m., a call had been made from Lindsay's BlackBerry, which probably occurred by accident while she was being attacked. Witnesses reported seeing Lindsay enter the house with a man and woman shortly before this. The couple had called Lindsay on a cell phone, which was used exclusively for the crime and purchased under the name Paulo Rodriguez. In December 2007, Lindsay had met up with an old friend while visiting her father in Calgary, Alberta. 1 month later, this friend was arrested as part of the largest cocaine bust in Alberta's history. Since Lindsay was murdered shortly after the bust, there is speculation that the 2 events were somehow connected. In February 2016, Lindsay's father claimed that he was threatened by one of the people involved in his daughter's murder, who said that Lindsay was targeted by drug dealers to send a message to anyone who squealed on them. At this point, however, there is no evidence to bring charges against anyone. Jeff Buzick is determined to preserve the memory of his daughter, Lindsay, who was murdered in 2008. About 30 people gathered Thursday for the annual walk he organizes in her name. It took place 9 years to the day that the 24-year-old real estate agent was stabbed to death while showing a Gordon head home, a still unsolved crime that looked to have been a planned and perhaps for-hire killing. The walk is held for 2 main reasons, he said. 1, it's to heal. 4, the family, the community and friends, said Buzick, who traveled from his home in Calgary to take part. And, of course, keep the case in the public eye. Despite the time that has passed since the death, the pain remains, he said. It doesn't get any easier each year. The event, called the Walk for Justice, began at Royal Oak Burial Park and followed a 17-kilometer route that ended at Sannock Municipal Hall. The group made a stop along the way at the D'Souza Place house where Lindsay Buzick's body was found. Buzick said Lindsay was a beautiful young woman and a shining light in the community. He said he is frustrated that those responsible for what happened to her are still out there. I want the people to know, most importantly, that the people involved in Lindsay's murder are in this community and walking free for 9 years, while the rest of us, the community, the family, the friends of Lindsay, have basically been in prison. Buzick said he has an idea of who is behind the killing. Sannock Mayor Richard Atwell, who saw the walkers off as a show of support, said Sannock police have worked hard on the case. What the case really needs is it needs a lead. It needs another lead, he said. All the leads up to this point have been pursued and they've reached either a dead end or they've reached a level where the officers feel that they would not be able to achieve a result in court that would end up in a solid conviction. Buzick said he would like to see police paying more attention to the murder, and questioned whether anyone was working directly on the case. He said he has had some frank talks with police officials. As of now, we're nowhere. Sannock Police Acting Sergeant Jeremy Leslie said the case remains open and active, although the investigation isn't being carried out full-time. It is not considered a cold case, he said. Investigators work multiple files as the normal course of duty in the detective division, he said. All tips and leads are triaged appropriately as they're received. Leslie said that while officers have been transferred into and out of the police effort over time, the main people have been there from the start. The key investigators have always retained continuity of the investigation, he said. 6. The disappearance of Ravel Balmain. When beautiful blonde dancer Ravel Balmain vanished 20 years ago, she was happy and in love with a man she had met only 6 weeks before. That man, writer Piers Fisher Pollard, did not know Ravel was working as a high-class escort and believed she was just an upbeat and generous girl from a good family, working hard after getting her big break in the modeling world. They met through a mutual friend at a nightclub in Sydney and had their first date a week later. Piers was 27 years old and working in the film industry, while Ravel was 22 and had just landed herself a front-page cover on Oyster magazine. 2 decades on since Piers last saw her on November 5, 1994, on the day that she vanished. Police are still yet to charge anyone with the talented dancer's murder. Piers is now 47 and has moved from Sydney to Byron Bay. He has never spoken publicly about his relationship with Ravel before, but, on the 20th anniversary of her disappearance, has opened up to Daily Mail Australia about the precious girlfriend he lost, and how he believes she was accidentally killed. Their relationship started out like any other young couples. After meeting in a club, they organized a date a week later and started seeing each other. She was preparing to go on a cabaret dance tour to Japan, so she was very excited about that and about going to see her family in Port Macquarie, Piers said. After her disappearance, Piers was told that Ravel was working as an escort and possibly used drugs. But he said when he met her she was always upbeat and didn't feel like a negative person with drug issues. He believes that maybe she was working as an escort to support a habit and then realized that modeling was a better way to earn money. Apparently after meeting me she was keen to stop, Piers explained. Ravel had told her friends she was in love with Piers. When asked if he felt the same way, he replied, "It's such a long time ago. It seemed possible that we were in love. We really liked each other." He still remembers his time with her fondly. One night she had been working doing on a photo shoot and we met after. She was really spoiling me. She wanted to take me out to dinner and spend a lot of money on cognac. Now I think perhaps the splurging was because of guilt. She was generous and fun-loving and certainly didn't seem like she had a drug problem, he said. Despite the fact Ravel was going away to Japan to dance, the pair planned to stay together. We'd spoke about it and how we were going to continue the relationship. She was only going for a while and not forever. We had plans afterwards, he recalled. On the fateful day of November 5, 1994, Piers and Ravel had spent the morning together. However, he came down with a headache and decided to go home and have a lie down. They planned to meet up again that evening for a drink. I had a really bad headache and felt quite ill. We were going to hang out, but I ended up putting her on a bus to see a friend in Paddington, he said. That evening when Piers tried to contact Ravel, he received no answer. She wasn't answering her phone. She had a pager, which was a little unusual back then, and I was paging her, he recalled. Piers reported Ravel missing to police. They weren't very interested, but I did manage to get a response eventually because it was out of character for her, and she had never dropped out like that before from everyone. On the Saturday that she vanished, the blue-eyed 5'8" model was planning to say some last goodbyes before taking up the dance contract in Japan and had arranged to meet a girlfriend that night for a drink before going to see Piers. She never showed up. Later that evening she was to meet her boyfriend, but failed to keep this appointment as well. Her girlfriend last spoke to her by phone at 7:15 p.m. Ravel's half-sister Sue Ellen Simpson told the media back in 1994. The alarm was raised when Ravel also failed to catch the 9:30 a.m. train from Sydney to Newcastle the next day, to say goodbye to her mother before she traveled to Japan. What Ravel's family and Piers didn't know at the time was that the stunning model was leading a double life, and secretly working as an escort for two high-end agencies. Piers believes Ravel was probably on the way to visit her friend when she got a call to visit an escort client. Police confirmed that on the day of her disappearance she had gone to a house on McNair Avenue, in Kingsford, to visit a client named Gavin Owen Seymour. Mr. Seymour has always maintained to police that Ravel was then driven to the nearby Red Tomato Inn at 7 p.m. that evening, but no one from the inn ever saw her. Police also spotted scratches on Mr. Seymour's neck, chest and hands, but he explained he got the injuries from surfing. Mr. Seymour was named the main person of interest during a coronial inquiry in 1998 and 1999, but no charges against him were ever laid. He denied any suggestions that he may have killed her, and Deputy State Coroner John Abernethy said he could not identify any motive. While Mr. Seymour certainly had the opportunity to kill Balmain, and rightly in my view is the main person of interest to police, there is no plausible motive proved, Mr. Abernethy said. Mr. Abernethy declined to comment on the case when questioned by Daily Mail Australia on Tuesday. A Department of Justice spokesman said, he said he conducted the inquest a long time ago, and it would be difficult for him to recall precise details. The inquiry also looked into the theory that a person associated with the escort agency, Select Companions, she was working with may have had something to do with her disappearance. Ravel had worked at the agency for 6 weeks but had fallen in love with a new boyfriend, Piers Fisher Pollard, and had decided to leave escort work. Mr. Seymour was meant to be her final client. When the man from the escort agency was questioned, he told the police and the inquiry differing tales of his whereabouts on the day Ravel vanished. He has always maintained his innocence. In 2008, Homicide Detective Superintendent Jeff Beresford announced police had new information and forensic test results relating to the case. The evidence reportedly renewed the theory that Ravel was murdered at a house in Kingsford. A full forensic search was carried out of the crime scene at Kingsford during the last 12 months. Detective Superintendent Beresford told The Australian, "We are able to say we have fresh evidence as a result of those investigations." Around the same time as the breakthrough, the Daily Telegraph reported that the main person of interest, Mr. Seymour, had disappeared from Sydney. Police allegedly wanted to find him so that they could take a DNA sample. Piers has now claimed that Mr. Seymour is living in Tasmania. A police source confirmed that Mr. Seymour is still the main suspect. Piers said another theory he was told about Ravel's disappearance was that a rich foreigner abducted her. "I heard he really liked her and they surmised that she'd been kidnapped and had taken her to his mother country to join a harem. No one thought she had just disappeared, and especially when they found her shoe. I had a very strong feeling then that I wouldn't see her again," he said. One of Ravel's cork-heeled platform shoes was found 2 days after she disappeared in a street in Kingsford, a southeastern suburb of Sydney. scattered across 4 streets with her cane makeup bag, diary and the keys to her Bellevue Hill unit. It was the first worrying indication police had that Ravel may have been harmed. Piers was conscious that police may have suspected him of having some involvement in Ravel's disappearance even though they never said as much. But when it emerged she was working as an escort, he said the case became more clear-cut for them. I stopped being a suspect very quickly because she had seen other people after me, he said. Despite that, he still voluntarily went to police and gave them a sample of his DNA so that they could officially rule out any involvement. Piers never met Ravel's family because they had only been dating 6 weeks, but shortly after her disappearance he received a visit from ex-copper and standover man Tim Bristow. Mr. Bristow had been hired by Ravel's father Ivor to investigate his daughter's disappearance. It was then that Piers learned more about the underworld that Ravel had been a part of. Once the police told me that she was a prostitute, I had my greatest fear for her safety, he said. One person in the fashion industry had mentioned she might be an escort, but I hadn't paid much attention. So it was a bit of a gut crunch. It didn't in any way minimize the grief, but it maybe left some unanswered questions, although I could understand why she didn't want to tell me. What was more heartbreaking was that she said this was her last job and she was getting out. That is pretty hard to take. It's been 7,304 days since Ravel Balmain was last seen alive and police have still not solved the case. Piers said it took him a long time to really get over it and that he didn't get involved with anyone for a while afterwards. Ravel was a nice, positive energy to be around. If she had any issues, they weren't weighing her down. When she went missing I went through a range of emotions: shock, fear, feeling out of control and not knowing. I also had a lot of anger towards whoever took her away from us, and had to work through that for a long time. I wanted also to know why. I wondered who would want to do this to her, or why. NSW police told Daily Mail Australia on Monday. Strike Force Armagh, led by detectives from the Homicide Squad, continues to investigate the disappearance and suspected murder of Ravel Balmain. Disappearance 7. The murder of David Muirfield. In 1995, 42-year-old real estate attorney David Muirfield was a partner at the law firm of Smith, Muirfield, and Richards in Dallas. At approximately 7:30 a.m. on the morning of February 2, 2 female employees entered the firm's office building and summoned the elevator. When it arrived, they were shocked to discover David's body inside. He had been shot in the back of the head, execution style. Since David's wallet was missing, robbery appeared to be the motive, but the wallet was discovered a few miles away with money and credit cards still inside. Upon closer examination, there seemed to be a more mysterious aspect to David's baffling murder. At 7:30, Juanita Lackey arrived without her keys. Secretary Roxanne Lederman let her in. When they went to use the elevator, the women found a body inside. Clint Blackman recalled the incident. I heard a lot of screaming and hollering. Juanita said that she thought that there was a man in the elevator, but all they'd really seen was legs, and weren't really sure what was there. The body appeared to be that of David Muirfield, one of Clint Blackman's colleagues and a partner in the law firm of Smith, Muirfield, and Richards. He had been shot in the back of the head, execution style. He left behind 2 children and a new bride of only 3 months. Because David's wallet was taken, Sergeant Jerry W. King of the Dallas Police thought it might be a robbery, but his opinion changed once the wallet was found. Mr. Muirfield's wallet was recovered a few miles from the crime location, and in the wallet was still a small amount of money and all of his credit cards. So I believe, had robbery had been a motive, that stuff would not have been recovered. As police dug deeper, they learned that the day before he was murdered, David received 4 phone calls from a mysterious stranger named Sam Jones. David's co-worker, Jennifer Wanamaker, remembered the call vividly. He told me his name was Sam Jones, but he wouldn't tell me who he was with, or what it was concerning. David spoke to him for, I guess, a little under 10 minutes. I went up and kinda joked with David and I said, "Oh, what's he trying to sell you?" And David says, "Well, he's not trying to sell me anything yet. He says he wants to do something for me." Sergeant King suspected that Sam Jones was an alias. David Muirfield, we discovered during this case, had a notepad on his desk, which had a calendar on it. And on February the 9th he had a marking there for a name and an appointment he had at 6:30 a.m. with Sam Jones. Due to the common nature of the name, It's my guess it's possibly a fictitious name. Clint Blackman found the time of the meeting unusual. I had known David and worked with him for years, and know David's habits, and he never liked to get to work early. In fact, to see him at work before 9 was just unusual. He was not an early riser, he usually liked to work later. A check of a notepad on David's desk revealed that he had a meeting scheduled at 6:30 a.m. that morning with someone named Sam Jones. The day before the murder, the firm had received 4 phone calls from a man using that name. No one at the firm knew who the caller was, but David did eventually speak with him and claimed that Jones wanted to do something for him. David had a habit of arriving at the office for work at around 9 a.m., so his co-workers found it very unusual that he would agree to schedule a meeting with Jones at 6:30 a.m. It's been theorized that the killer requested the early meeting time so that David would be the only person in the building when he committed the crime. It's very likely that Sam Jones was an alias, but no one knows his true identity or his motive for murdering David Muirfield. 8. The disappearance of Mary Shin. Shin was last seen in Magnolia, Arkansas on July 20, 1978. She owned an art studio on Magnolia Street and taught regular classes there. She was trying to sell a house on East McNeil Street and had advertised about it in the newspaper. Authorities believe she showed the house to an unknown man at 4 p.m. on July 19. He reportedly wanted to trade her house for a parcel of land he owned on Taylor Highway, 9 miles south of town. But Shin didn't seem to think the transaction would go through. At 11 a.m. on July 20, however, Shin got a call from the man and he said he wanted to see the house again. He told her his car was in for repairs, and he needed to take a cab to East McNeil Street. They agreed to meet at the S-Mart across the street from Shin's art studio, and they would go together to the house at East McNeil Street. Shin told a friend to expect her back by 1:30 p.m. She has never been heard from again. A carpenter who'd been working across the street from the house Shin was selling recalled having seen her with a man on the day of her disappearance. He placed the sighting between 10:30 and 11:30 a.m. He described the man as Caucasian, 25 to 28 years old with dark brown collar-length hair, a medium-length beard and mustache, 6'1 to 6'2 tall and 215 to 225 pounds. The man wore a mesh baseball cap and drove a dark green Pontiac with a lighter green vinyl top, possibly a 1969 to 1970, or 1972 Bonneville Catalina model. Police are uncertain whether the man the witness described actually had anything to do with Shin's disappearance. However, a neighbor who took his lunch break at 11:30 a.m. that day closely resembled the witness description, and they think the carpenter may have seen him instead. A more promising sighting came from a young girl who was at the S-Mart at 11 a.m. the day of Shin's disappearance. She said a man came in and asked for a quarter to make a phone call, spoke on the payphone for 5 minutes and left. Because this corresponds to known facts about Shin's disappearance, investigators believe the man this witness saw may have been the man who was supposed to meet Shin. He is described as Caucasian, in his mid-20s with dark curly hair, approximately 5'8" tall and 185 to 200 pounds. Shin's blue 1976 Buick Special was found unlocked with the keys inside it at Smitty's grocery on the afternoon of her disappearance. 2 employees at the store said they saw it there at 1 p.m., but the police didn't secure it until 5 o'clock, or 6 o'clock. A photo of the car is posted below this case summary. By the time law enforcement got control of the vehicle, several people had been inside it and may have disturbed the potential crime scene. Authorities stated the items found inside the car indicated Shin hadn't left of her own accord. There was Shin's navy blue denim purse, emptied out on the driver's side floor with its contents scattered, Shin's white canvas sneakers pushed under the gas and brake pedals, a pair of sunglasses and a novel. Shin's wallet was there with some cash inside, but her address book was missing. The rear left fender of the Buick had deep scratches in the paint and inside the car were seeds and bits of grass. Investigators believe it was driven into a meadow. The man Shin was supposed to see on the day of her disappearance has never been identified, although various suspects' names have surfaced over the years. In spite of an extensive investigation, there's been no trace of Shin since 1978. Foul play is suspected in her disappearance. 9. The murder of Joana Parish. Grief stiffens his face and the words won't come. Give me a second, says Roger Parish, flushed and struggling to talk about the death of his daughter. There is a long silence before he manages to swallow the pain, clear his throat and speak of Jo. It's been 25 years, I should be able to do this. Her mother breaks in, the time doesn't make any difference. It gets worse. They have both carried these terrible feelings of grief, anger and frustration for such a long time. The body of Joana Parish was found in a river in France way back in 1990. She had been stripped, beaten, bound and strangled. Jo was a 20-year-old language student from Leeds University, who was just coming to the end of a placement teaching English at a lycée in Auxerre. Her death made front-page news, but that was a quarter of a century ago. Margaret Thatcher was still Prime Minister. And here's the thing, 25 years later, Jo's parents are still waiting for the French police to catch her killer, or let them know the latest news from the investigation, or communicate in any way at all. Pauline Morel, his former wife, compares the investigators to the bumbling inspector clowns in the Pink Panther movies. Absolute cock-ups from beginning to end. This is Klaus-esque. I've said it in France. They knew what I meant. They split up as husband and wife around the time of Jo's death, but remain united in grief all these years later, sitting at either side of the kitchen at Roger's cottage in Newnham-on-Severn, the village where they both live in Gloucestershire. Back in May, they tried and failed to meet the latest judge d'instruction in charge of the case. Now in this exclusive interview they reveal that they have written to her pleading, for one last time, to be allowed to know what is going on. This year is the 25th anniversary of Joana's murder. We were disappointed not to have been able to meet you, says the letter addressed to Madame Sabine Caris at the Tribunal de Grande Instance de Paris. Their lawyer in France assures them the case is not closed. Earlier this year their MP, Mark Harper, took it up with the Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, who said he would raise it with the French Ministry of Justice and report back. We have not heard anything more than that. So we are literally in limbo, says Roger. The murder of Joana Parish was exceptionally cruel, Lord Bragg says. By all accounts she was a remarkable young woman, well set on what would have been a deeply worthwhile and flourishing career, and the pain of her death must be intensified by the fact that the murderers have never been brought to justice. Roger and Pauline have spent a small fortune going to France and hiring lawyers over the years. The attitude seems to be, if we ignore them they'll go away. Today the sunlight is flooding in through the open door, the birds are singing in the garden and the world seems too lovely for such cruelty as their daughter's murder. But that is also how it was on May 17, 1990. They were in their 40s then, proud parents of a teenage son called Barney and his 20-year-old big sister. There's a photograph of Jo looking stylish in a long raincoat, with her black hair cut in a bob, by the River Yonne in Auxerre. Her mum and dad were just about to visit when she died. We were going to bring back all her stuff, including her duvet and teddy bear, while she went on to Czechoslovakia to see her boyfriend, Patrick, says Pauline, now 70, whose eyes are full of hurt and potential tears. Lovely Patrick comes and puts flowers on the grave every year. He is now married, with 2 little girls, but he still comes. Roger is a dapper, silver-haired man of 72 who remembers being at work at the land registry in Gloucester that day 25 years ago, when 2 police officers arrived. They said, "Jo's body has been found in the river." For half a second I thought, right, okay, which hospital is she in? Then the reality dawned on me. They said it was her body. A lot of things are blacked out after that. They were together in the house when their son Barney came home from school. What did they say? Pauline's voice drops to a tiny, faraway whisper. Jo's not coming home. Barney was 3 years younger. Jo was a guiding light for him. Really, she was bright, inquisitive, hard-working, very kind, gentle. She probably had more influence on him than either of us. Her death messed up our son's head. For a long time, Barney was too shocked to weep at first. I remember having my arm around him saying, "You are allowed to cry," Pauline recalls. I couldn't cry then. I can now. You can't stop me sometimes. Now grown up with a family of his own, Barney has created a social media campaign calling for people to help get justice for Jo. They were advised not to go to France until their daughter's body had been brought home, which took 3 weeks. When Pauline did get to Auxerre, she was not impressed. Right from the beginning, they lied to us. I asked the investigating magistrate if my daughter had been raped. He said, "No, I guarantee she was not raped." That was not true. Within a fortnight it was in the French press that she had been raped, because the laboratories in Paris had said yes. That was awful. Roger sighs and says, "You want people to tell you the truth, not what they think you want to hear." Magistrates have come and gone since then. Most have been fantastic, welcoming and helpful, they say. But those in recent years have been silent or evasive, even in person. "I'm quite calm normally, but I sit in those meetings and I am ready to blow," says Pauline. "I say, you cocked it up right at the beginning. It's about time you got your act together." They claim the area where the body was found was never properly sealed off and the mayor and other local officials wandered all over it, contaminating evidence. They also understand the DNA samples taken at the scene have been lost or corrupted. "Most of the leads have fizzled out or we have had reassurance that the person wasn't responsible," says Roger. But everything seemed to change in 2005, when Michel Fourniret and Monique Olivier were arrested in Belgium. Fourniret confessed to kidnapping, raping and murdering 9 girls over a period of 14 years, and is serving life in prison. His wife, Olivier, sometimes picked up young women for him as she drove along in their car with their baby son in the back, and is also in jail. She appeared to come out with a statement suggesting she was present at the murder of a young woman in Auxerre in 1990, he says. The time, place and other details fitted pretty much what happened to Joe. The following day our house was surrounded by satellite vans and reporters. It appeared that this was the light at the end of the tunnel. However, Olivier withdrew her statement, claiming to have made it under pressure from an investigator. "We are pretty desolate about that." Roger and Pauline would like Fourniret and Olivier to be questioned again, with a British police officer involved this time. "You hear of it happening in cases like them, kids, but they have more friends in high places than us," she says. Those friends included Rebecca Brooks, then the chief executive at News International, who was accused of threatening to put the Home Secretary, Theresa May, on the front page of The Sun every day until she launched a fresh British police investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. She denied using threats and called it persuasion. Whatever it was, her friendship with David Cameron must have helped. The inquiry took place. Joe's parents want the French to tell them what became of the investigation into a lorry driver called Thierry Villetard, who lived near the school where Joe taught in Auxerre. He is currently in prison for sex crimes. Meanwhile, Joe's friends from university are keen to reclaim her memory. Joe was a lively, funny, kind and gentle person, someone who could always make me smile. But for ages, every memory I had of her was tainted by the horror of how she died and the awareness that she was no longer there to share our journey, says Rose Anderson, one of the organizers of the tree planting ceremony on 26 September. They studied French together and were in the same halls of residence. "We can never undo what happened to Joe, but by remembering her for the wonderful person she was, not just as a murder victim, we feel we are gradually bringing her memory back into the light and restoring what was desecrated." Roger and Pauline say they are touched and honored by the kindness and loyalty of her friends. But do they think there will ever be justice for their daughter? "I don't think I will ever give up hope, but I think it is unlikely," says Roger. "If it's purely down to the French investigative teams, it's possible we won't get an answer," says Pauline, before reflecting on the years that have gone by. "I lived in Spain for a while. I haven't just sat here and rotted, but it doesn't make any difference where I am in the end because she's there. I can hear her voice, I can see her face, just as she was then." She smiles at the thought of her daughter and summons strength. "Joe wouldn't have stopped. If this had happened to us or to Barney, she would have kept going, so we will keep going. She would have kept going." 10. The Disappearances of Nick and Lisa Massey. A renewed appeal for information on a 20-year-old missing persons mystery led CBC News to review an old report on the disappearance of North Vancouver businessman Nick Massey and his socialite wife, Lisa. Here is the story CBC reported in 1995, a year after the Masseys went missing. The night before they vanished, Nick and Lisa Massey turned down an invitation from friends to watch the Symphony of Fire fireworks display in Vancouver's English Bay. Instead, the North Vancouver couple said they had an appointment to go to on that warm Wednesday evening. Nick Massey, a 55-year-old retired banker, had told several people he was to meet a man who wanted his help in investing $10 million. Massey made a reservation for 4 at his favorite restaurant, Trader Vic's in Cole Harbour, but no one from the party ever showed up. nor did anyone call to cancel, which restaurant staff felt was odd behavior for Nick. The couple were reportedly spotted together next door at the Westin Bayshores Garden Lounge from roughly 6:30 p.m. until 10:30 p.m. Nick Massey was wearing a jogging suit and the couple shared a bottle of wine. The next morning, August 11, 1994, his wife made 2 calls from his cell phone. She called her boss, and she called her husband's business partner to say they'd both be away for a few days. The 2 calls were routed through Bowen Island's repeater, off West Vancouver, which means the call could have been made from the Sunshine Coast, but it also could have come from Point Grey on Vancouver's west side. No one has heard from either Nick or Lisa Massey since. When Lisa Massey's sister tried to contact her a week later, she found the house unlocked and the car parked in the driveway. 2 plastic zip ties, or zap straps, were found on the ground by the front door. Police said their passports had been left behind, and their bank accounts appeared to have been untouched. They may be dead, we don't know, we have absolutely no idea, Mark Sylvester told CBC News. A year later, in 1995, it's very, very strange. Police said Nick and Lisa Massey, who had both been married before, didn't appear to be leading high-risk lives. Lisa, who was 39 when she went missing, met Nick when she was 29 years old and working at a hair salon on Cambie Street. She would cut his hair. He had worked for the Bank of Montreal for 37 years, and had retired just 8 months before he disappeared. But during his time in the private banking department, Nick Massey's path crossed with some of Vancouver's most controversial stock promoters. One of his former clients, Murray Pazim, told CBC News in 1995 that he'd heard all kinds of crazy stories, that he's been cemented or put away. Other stories that he's still alive, probably in hiding, he said. But Pazim's favorite theory is that the Masseys were in a witness protection program. I think he's alive and the police know where he is, Pazim said. One fact supporting the witness in hiding theory was that Massey had been scheduled to testify in a trial involving a former tennis partner who was accused of stealing $100,000, but police said Massey was only a minor witness. Another possibility involved the Pine Ridge Capital Group scandal, in which millions of dollars went missing when the business collapsed in 1992. Nick Massey had been a personal banker for Harry Mall, who created the Pine Ridge Group, and who later relocated to the Cayman Islands. Private investigator Ozzy Cabin, who was hired by Nick Massey Jr. to find his father, said he was also looking beyond Vancouver's center of investment on Howe Street, and into the local Dutch business community. Fred Hoffman, an accountant who did business with Massey, went missing a few years before. Roughly $10 million of his clients' money disappeared at around the same time. One of those clients, a retired anesthesiologist from Seattle, was introduced by Massey to Hoffman, and lost $3 million. When Hoffman disappeared, Cabin said the anesthesiologist had become unreachable since Massey went missing. Investigators also found that the Masseys had made a secret trip to the Cayman Islands in April 1994. They told no one where they were going, just that they had to go away. Cabin said they opened a bank account while there and put in $50,000 worth of stock. CBC News learned the Masseys also had wills drawn up during the trip. Cabin said another theory floating around was that Nick Massey had either deliberately or inadvertently become involved in laundering a motorcycle gang's drug money. 20 years later, Cabin tells CBC News he believes Nick Massey was running from something, and that the day before the couple went missing, the former banker had attended a funeral and was distraught, saying he would leave town. Neither Cabin nor police have been successful in tracking down the Masseys, or finding out what happened to them. Nick Massey would be 75 years old now, his wife Lisa would be 59, and their families still want answers.